All right, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. We're delighted you're with us. Since we're here, we might as well do something. So why not open the Bible? Let's do it, shall we? Matthew 23. We're doing some woes today, ladies and gentlemen. We've got 2 more weeks of woes, and we're calling this conversation Bad Religion because, shockingly, Jesus did not come to start a world religion. Jesus came to do away with what makes religion necessary to begin with. And so he goes in a very Old Testament, like prophetic manner of speaking, he goes after the very folks that were the most well-regarded religious authorities of his day. He's not going after Judaism, and he's not going after all Pharisees or all teachers. He's going after a subset of people who are right there in front of him, rejecting him, opposing him, so hard-hearted against him. They would rather attribute the work and miracles that he was doing to Satan rather than, to God. That's how hard-hearted they were. So Jesus, the woes are announcements of impending judgment. If they do not forsake this way of understanding Torah and practicing Torah, they are headed to destruction. And so Jesus gives 7 of them. We're going to cover 2 today, 1 next week, and then we are done. And we're going to start a series of new conversations. Not that anyone's keeping track, not that anyone came today and said, you know what? I need some bad religion today. And if you thought that, then, throwing the Bible maybe was your taste of that. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to start Matthew 23. And the big critique Jesus has against some of the religious practitioners is that they were hypocrites. And that word, before Jesus got a hold of it, was just a neutral word that meant someone who wears a mask as an actor or actress back in the day. It was typically all men. So men would play, or boys would play the female parts, or young men play the female parts, but you would wear a mask. And so to be a hypocrite, the Greek word is a combination of 2 words, under or judge. To judge under something means that there's a difference between how you present yourself and what you're really like. And that was just how you acted back in the first century if you were a stage actor. Jesus took this and turned it into a picture of being two-faced, where you had one face towards the world, but then there was a separate reality of your heart. And Jesus' trenchant critiques are expressions of his disgust with this way of approaching God. So there are 2 pictures he's going to give of this inside-outside sort of disconnection. The first one is in Matthew 23, verse 25. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites, there's that word. You are so focused on cleaning the outside of the cup and the dish, but inside, you guys are full of greed and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and dish, and then the outside will also be clean. Second picture, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, or you hypocrites. You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of bones of the dead and everything unclean. Now, let me explain this very briefly. So there were several different festivals in Judaism where you would go to the city of Jerusalem in order to participate. Passover was the biggest of those. And so every year, thousands and thousands of people would make their way to Jerusalem. The problem was Jerusalem is surrounded by tombs. And according to Numbers 19, if you come into contact with a tomb, you've come into contact with something that's unclean, and you therefore are unclean for 7 days. The festival of Passover was 7 days, and so literally you would save up money to go to attend this festival. You step across a tomb that you had no idea was there. You're unclean for 7 days, and your journey was for nothing. So the month before Passover, people would go out and they would scrub or mark these tombs with a kind of a white, like lime solution that would identify that the tomb was there. That way you could avoid it and not become unclean. Jesus looks at that and says, oh, that's a great picture of you guys. You look a bit cleaned up on the outside, but on the inside, you're full of death. You say that you're helping people become clean, but anyone who comes into contact with you themselves becomes unclean. And then he says, and oh, ouch. In the same way, on the outside, you appear to people as righteous, But on the inside, you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness. And again, for you Bible nerds, the word wickedness here is literally the word that means lawlessness. In other words, the Pharisees were so concerned with keeping the law of God, they did it in a way that actually broke the law of God. You could not use a more poignant picture of like the failure of the Pharisee than this word. Because their boast was they kept the law, and not just the 613 commandments, but all the oral tradition too. And instead Jesus says, no, but you're actually full of lawlessness because of your keeping of the law. Now, the picture we want to look most at this morning is the first one we looked at. And that's the one about the cup and the dish, hence the antiquated journey mug. I know, we are full of creative visual aids today. Hey, it's talking about cups and dishes. Let's get a cup. Perfect. And you wonder where your tithe dollars go. This sort of ingenuity. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You clean the outside of the cup and dish. Now, let's talk about this. The Pharisees were, okay, so back in the Old Testament, the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, in the Torah, everything about human life is sacred. Every single bit of human life is sacred, including eating meals. And so one of the ways that you would honor God in the way that you would eat is you would consecrate food or dishes to God in certain ways. The Pharisees got a hold of this idea, and they took what was commanded of the priests to do in the temple, and they wanted to apply that level of purity to everybody else in Israel. So for the Pharisees, meal times, supposed to be a place to honor God, became a place where you would show off how righteous you were, or you could judge another person about how unrighteous they were. And there was actually a debate. So one of the things that the Pharisees required is that you would this wasn't about hygiene. This was about ritual purity. You would wash your cup in a certain way and your dish in a certain way. And there was actually, I kid you not, a debate between two of the main schools of Pharisees in Jesus' day about whether or not you would clean the inside of the dish and that was all that needed cleaning, or if you cleaned the inside and the outside of the dish in 2 separate rituals, and that was what made the cup clean. Right. They took something that God intended to be an expression of gratitude and life and flourishing. God, thank you for everything. And they made it into who's righteous and who's not. Jesus, not surprisingly, never participates in these rituals and gets into trouble all of the time with them. So Jesus takes their focus on cleaning the outside of the cup and the dish as a picture of the human soul, where the outside of the cup and the dish stand for your outward behaviors, and the inside of the cup and the dish stands for your heart or your soul, the inner being. And so he says, okay, you guys are so focused on cleaning cups and dishes, you're neglecting the reality of your heart. It's similar to the critique he made last week, which was you're worried about gnats, but you're swallowing camels. You worry about things like cups and dishes, but you yourselves are so unclean. There's another level to that critique where he says, okay, the concern you have with the outside of the cup and the dish is actually a picture of your hypocrisy. So you care about the outside of the cup and the dish, but inside you don't care at all. You care more about looking good than being good, in other words. And so there you are full of hypocrisy. You have one face towards God and humans, and then another face that's real. Are you hanging in there so far with this wonderful explanation? Okay, 7 of us. Now, Jesus says, all right, you hypocrites, you clean the outside of the cup and the dish, but inside you are full of greed and self-indulgence. Now, greed and self-indulgence, when there are cases in Greek where 2 nouns are juxtaposed in a way where they explain each other and kind of talk about something mutually reinforcing. And so greed and self-indulgence, the word greed here, go ahead and put that up, Lucius, is to seize upon with force. Greed here doesn't mean like, hey, I want some money, and if I really want to raise. Greed here means you are actively robbing and exploiting the poor. Self-indulgence is a word that means uncontrollable desire, that you have no strength of will internally. You just follow your desire wherever it goes. And so when you put these two nouns together, one scholar translates it this way: you Pharisees are full of what you have gotten through violent selfishness. It's an economic sin. And Jesus will tell a parable, and the point will be because the Pharisees love money. Or along with the Pharisees, the temple authorities, we're told, devour the homes of widows. I don't know if you know this, but sometimes religion can be used to exploit the poor. I don't know if you know this. And enrich the people who are promoting the bad religion. And so bad religion, according to Jesus, next slide, or go back if you would, Lucius. Bad religion, according to Jesus, wounds people and makes them sicker, while all the while convincing them that they're making them better. Whereas Jesus, what did Jesus do? He healed, he brought wholeness, he cared about the outside, but it was the inside he was most interested in. He made people clean and he liberated them. So the thing that's so interesting is that Luke gives us a slightly different version of this critique about how to get clean. So in Matthew's account, Jesus doesn't say how to get clean. He just says clean the inside and the outside will be clean too. In Luke, though, Jesus adds something. So Luke 11, when Jesus had finished speaking, a Pharisee invited him to eat. So he went in and reclined at the table like you do. The Pharisee was surprised when he noticed that Jesus did not first wash his hands before the meal. Jesus never honored any of this stuff that they did. When the Lord said to him, now then, you Pharisees clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside you're full of greed and wickedness. You foolish people, did not the one who make the outside also make the inside? But now as for what is inside you, and then what's he say? Be generous to the poor, and the inside will be clean for you. So Jesus is addressing the bad religion that exploits people for money. And he says, if you want to be clean, instead of exploiting the poor, give to them. Are you with me on this so far? Now, when I say, are you with me on this, that doesn't mean do you agree? It just means, am I speaking English words clearly and intelligibly? Because sometimes that does not happen at all. So Jesus presents us with, and the Gospels, this is all over the Gospels, presents us with the case that you can do all the right things on the outside and be totally sick on the inside, right? So the Pharisee and the tax collector, it's a parable that Jesus gives later in Luke. There's a Pharisee who is boasting before God that he's praying, he's tithing, he's fasting, but then he looks at the tax collector and says, I'm thankful I'm not like this poor slob over here. So does the praying, the tithing, and the fasting, does that cancel out the self-righteous judgment of the Pharisee on the inside? Does it cancel it out? Does it? No. That's the thing he's getting at with the Pharisees. You care about your external purity, but you're full of things that make you unclean on the inside. Right? So he says this thing in Mark, which gets at this horribly. It says, again, Jesus called the crowd to him and said, listen to me, everyone, and understand this. Nothing outside of a person can defile them by going into them. Rather, it's what comes out of a person that defiles them. What comes out of a person is what defiles them, for what is within out of a person's heart, the evil thoughts that come, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. All of these evil come from inside and defile a person. So for as much as the Pharisees boasted in how ritually pure they were on their outside, Jesus is like, you've missed the point entirely. You're actually like tombs that make other people unclean when you come into contact with them. You're like dishes where we don't even deal with what's inside. We just worry about cleaning the outside. And I don't know if you know anyone like this, but this seems to be a common thread of religious people throughout history, including myself. Now, the woe that Jesus is speaking against is the woe that people split. They have one way of life they present to each other and a different way of life that's real. And so Jesus is inviting us to not distinguish between the inside and the outside of the cup, but to simply say it's all one thing. And what the thing that Jesus is interested in about the one undivided thing is what's real in it, not what's pretend. You and I live, and again, I am a victim of and a purveyor of all of the bad religion we're talking about. So I can never just sit here and point at bad religion because I've done it. But I come from a brand of Jesus following that only rewards good performance on the outside. At church, I learned church was a place to hide and perform. It's why you dressed up. It's why the argument that you were having in the car with your family would stop the minute you pull in. Hey, brother. It's the reason if somebody asked how you were doing, you would never really answer. It's the reason that if you were on stage, you would never be honest about your struggles because you have a financial incentive to make sure people think you're more holy than you are. Like, we live in a Christian culture that virtually guarantees we will be two-faced. As if the work of Jesus is only managing our sin and not transforming our lives. And so what Jesus is interested in are undivided people. Now, that doesn't mean we're slobbering and bleeding over everybody that we meet, but it does mean that the predominant posture we have towards the world is one of alignment, integrity, and honesty. And that can come in such small ways or little ways. Like, so some people love the Enneagram. It's a way of talking about what drives people, and evidently I'm an Enneagram 5, which means I'm somebody that lives in my head. I love ideas, I love concepts. My wife, she hates that I don't communicate with her in words because I'm like, you should read my thoughts, honey. I love ideas. I love intellectual life, blah, 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 blah. And for a long, long time, it was important to me that people saw me as smart. And so I would never, ever want to say, I don't know, when someone brought up a topic or asked a question. And so I would BS. And I knew enough big words that I could BS people, right? That is a tiny example of the two-facedness that often dominates us. And so often when we do the Q&A, like, I try to very habitually say, I don't know. That's good for me. That's part of what looks like being undivided, is that I don't make stuff up if I don't really know. And I know that's a dumb, tiny example, but how much more, right, does the religious community reward that kind of performing and that kind of hiding? And so we want to be a community that doesn't punish people when they're real or when they're struggling in real time, not just 10 years ago with something. Are you with me? Again, not that you agree. Am I speaking language intelligibly? That's the thing. So bad religion can show up a couple of different ways in this. Way number one, bad religion can show up. Bad religion can show up when we only care about the outside. That was the trap of the Pharisees, right? As long as you're believing the right things and doing the right things, it doesn't matter what your heart's doing. You're okay with God. And so the Christian life becomes an exercise of not sinning as much or believing all the right doctrine. And the problem with that way, and this infects, I lived in this forever. I had a checklist. Good Christians read their Bible, they pray, they go to church, they share their faith, and they give money to the church. That was my list. And then they avoid all the bad things. And I had a scorecard at the end of every day about how I did. And my intimacy with God, I was told, depended upon doing that checklist well. So just imagine, some of you have utterly lived under this, the burdensome nature of what it looks like to follow Jesus. There's no joy in that. There's no kingdom life in that. There's no transformation in that. And it's in a totally sub-biblical view of God. God, I've since learned, is not interested in our religious performance. He's interested in the real you, the petty you, the sinful you, the greedy you, the ugly you. That's the you he's interested in, and that's the you he wants to transform. And yes, that will manifest itself on the outside, but that's not the priority. That's not the way in. He never looked at anybody and said, you got to get cleaned up first. He comes utterly and forever as an act of grace to be received, to be surrendered to be yielded to be submitted to, but never, ever, ever to be performed or to be pretended into. And so one way bad religion shows up is that we're surrounded by religious systems that reward the cleaning up of the outside, but inside we could be full of death. And there's no joy or there's no transformation in that. It's just empty religion. Now, if you're like me, once I found out that was empty religion, I went to the other extreme. Bad religion is not caring about the outside at all. Hey, Jesus, the junior high me. So Jesus forgives me for everything I'm ever going to do? And I'm already forgiven for those things? Like he's already taken them into account? He knows I'm going to do them and he's going to forgive me anyway? Good news indeed, right? Exactly. God's care and love and my citizenship in the heavens, all of that's guaranteed, baby. I get to do whatever I want and sprinkle a little Jesus on it, and I am saved because I prayed a prayer when I was 6 or whatever. And that's not exactly what Jesus is after either, right? Jesus will say things like a good tree will bear good fruit. A bad tree will bear bad fruits. Like you can actually know if someone is following Christ by the fruit that they bear. And that fruit, by the way, is not at all perfection or performance, but there is a trajectory and an orientation that progressively takes hold over people who are genuinely seeking after Christ. So on the one hand, we can just look around and say all that matters are the external performance markers of whatever our tribe says, the doctrinal statements, the worship songs, the speaking in tongues, the whatever it is. But on the other hand, a lot of us, including myself, have gone to the opposite extreme of like, yeah, the externals don't matter at all. Hallelujah, I'm under grace. The problem is grace is never permission. Grace is always transformation. Grace, if it's real grace, will always result in transformation. Because grace is a real thing that affects real change in human hearts. It's why Jesus says you have to be born again. I know that can be like a trite evangelical statement, but he's saying something actually really profound. You cannot do this yourself. God has to do it for you, and then your job is surrender to it, embrace it, yield to it, live into it. Dumb example I've used 1,000 times. Forgive me, I'm using it again. All right? Do you know what it is? What example am I going to give right now? You don't know? Awesome. Then I haven't used it too much. But once I start, you'll know. Particularly you, my dear, will know. I was single until the age of how old? 29. Which I think some people find shocking. But not many. I married the first woman that said yes. Oh no. But I tell you, I want to give you my like bachelor bona fides because I was perfectly settled into the bachelor kind of life. Not the Bachelor, the show, lame. I mean like the single man, you know, those were the 90s. Some of you aren't familiar with that decade, but it was not bad. It was not bad. The grunge music was awesome. And my wife can testify that my manner of life was very aligned with and congruent with being a single fellow. I could get a week's worth of groceries in 10 minutes from Kroger. Most of those groceries consisted of frozen meals. If I actually had to pour something in a pot or a pan and use a plate, I would let those things soak in the sink until they became gross and I would throw them away and buy new ones. Laundry was all on the floor. There was clean, worn once, still wearable, and then the unmentionable over here. Toilet paper, it didn't have to be on the roll at all. I get the Costco $2,500 pack, and as long as you could reach it, you're fine. Why would you make your bed? That's dumb. You're going to mess it up again, and who cares? So I lived a very congruent life. I didn't have to ask permission to go anywhere, do anything. I just kind of did my thing. July 9th, in the year of our Lord, 2000, I step into a church, and I marry a woman, Justina Renee. The pastor, our friend Eric, looked at me and pronounced me what? I was a husband. Now, ladies, did I have any idea what it meant to be a husband? Did I? I know you know that, Jay. I'm fishing for other opinions on this. No! In fact, my previous manner of life was anti-husbanding. But yet, something real and true happened when I said I do, right? I became something. And then the rest of my married life was learning to be what was already true of me. I got the identity first and then worked it out of the security of that identity. And so I learned toilet paper goes on the roll and over the top. Someone said it's a mullet versus bangs. I can't picture that, but that was last service. But it goes over the top. Beds, a made bed communicates serenity and solitude when you engage, no? Okay. Ellen, I've heard you do some marriage counseling. I learned duvet covers are a thing. I've learned dust ruffles. Is that what they're called on the bed, the fringes? And I've learned that dishes can be washed and put into a dishwasher with very exact specifications that evidently the male mind cannot attain to. But my married life did not rest on a promise I made 25 years ago. My married life consists in my living out the promise today, correct? And as I unlearned all of my habits and patterns of bachelor life, I was learning what it meant to be a husband, to ask permission, to be sensitive to all of those things. And I wasn't doing those things in order to be a husband. I was doing it because I already was one. Are you with me? And so the Christian life, I think, is exactly the same way with a few alterations. The invitation is to become what's already true of you. When you receive Christ, you have died with Christ, you've been buried with Christ, you have risen with Christ. Paul spends 3 chapters in Ephesians just outlining all the things that happen to you, the real you. And then he says, now live up to the calling you've received. Under the grace of the covenant you have with Jesus, on behalf of Jesus' sacrifice for us, we now live into what's already true. And so it will naturally show itself, not in perfection, but in progress. Are you with me on this? Bless whoever that was. Are you with me on this? This is the difference between gospel and moralism. Moralism says, I do this in order to get blessed. Gospel says you're blessed, so do this. Like Paul will deal with sin, like, why would you sin? You're dead to it. Like, be holy. You're already holy. Like, it's that network of something that's already true worked out in the context of grace that is so transformative. Now, we have 16 minutes for questions if you'd like to explore this a little bit more. So we're going to flip on the lights. There's a text line if you've never been a part of a community that does questions. The answers aren't great, but the questions are always awesome. And the text line, if we don't get to your question, we will usually do it either via a podcast starring Ellen, or we will text you back with some thoughts. So, oh yes. No disclaimers.
No disclaimers.
No disclaimers. Sorry, I'm saying that because he usually gives me the, hey, this is a dumb question, but no more.
Okay.
You always ask great questions.
When Jesus talks to the Pharisees, it always seems like he's just done with them.
Yeah.
But is he talking to them in a way to kind of break through to change them? Or is it like, I'm done with you,
no,
your cup's dirty?
No, here's what's great. So when you read the book of Acts carefully, there are tons of Pharisees that become followers of Jesus. So no. So when Jesus meets self-righteousness, he reacts one way, with prophetic speech. When Jesus meets humble hearts or broken hearts, he reacts an entirely different way. You can literally chart it. So anyone that approaches Jesus out of self-righteousness, Jesus will let walk away for sure. But anyone who approaches Jesus out of need, hunger, sin, all in all the time. So the Pharisees were the ones who should have appreciated Jesus most. And irony of ironies, they were the ones who were most disgusted with the beauty of his ministry. And so he speaks so harshly against them in a way that we might do at times in situations to wake somebody up. So, and from the records, I mean, Paul is like primary example. From the records we have, there were loads of Pharisees that come to faith in Jesus. Now, that doesn't mean they all got it right, because we think there were the Pharisees that were arguing, hey, you have to be circumcised first for Gentiles in order to follow Jesus. But man, they were flooding in. So no, he did not give up on them ever. Okay. No, never, never, never. That's such a great question. Thank you. Really well done.
No, this is just a quick question. At what point, when you see church leaders, Christian school leaders, people outside in Christian, whatever, do you confront them or call them out on their hypocrisy?
Right. Well, that's always dangerous, because I'm a hypocrite too. So Jesus has this great line about, okay, let's deal with the log in my own eye before I ever deal with the speck in someone else's. So are there times where to speak against the hypocrisy of others? Of course. But to do that gently and to do that as a fellow struggler instead of, with condemnation, anger, judgment, that's the trick. If you're in a religious environment where you're seeing some of this bad religion and you're in a position to graciously invite the people in charge to reconsider their actions, do it. But if not, get out. There's no command that says you have to submit to abusive religious leaders. No command ever, 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 ever. And if you don't have confidence in the religious leadership, then go somewhere where you do. But remember, good religious leadership will look humble, it will look meek, it will look gentle, it will look a lot like the fruit of the Spirit.
But what if you're afraid they're still deceiving people or steering people in the wrong direction? You just leave it and then let that continue? I'm just...
Yeah. The question is, if you leave, do you just let that continue? And I can imagine scenarios where the right thing to do would be to draw attention to it. And Jesus gives us a way to do that, where you go by yourself, you go with another, and then to some degree or another, you allow that information to become public. So I'm all for that scenario too. I want to be very careful that I'm not the one seeking to be Messiah to a tribe of people. I know you're not saying that, my dear. But when I hear that dynamic gets engaged in me, like I'm the John the Baptist here, and I'm gonna show them. I want to be super careful. If you can affect change, affect change. If you cannot, then it is your health as a disciple of Jesus is more important than your participation in unjust religious systems. Absolutely. And there are times when Jesus was perfectly clear, you shake the dust off your feet and you move on. Not because that you've ceased being open, but because they just simply will not participate. Totally. Great question, baby. Hi.
Hey.
Yeah, I can now.
Okay. I want some wisdom from you about...
Well,
I believe in you.
I've got bad news.
So Jesus in this picture where he was with the Pharisees did not participate in their crap, what they were doing.
Yeah.
But when is it, sometimes I feel like I should participate in some things that people are doing to bring them to me.
Yeah.
And not, you know what I mean?
Yes.
So when do you do that?
Yeah.
And then when do you go, no, I'm not a part of it?
Oh, man. If you figure it out, let's write a book together. So here's what is it. So what did Jesus say yes to in that example? What did he say yes to?
Somebody help me.
No, he said yes to dinner.
Okay.
He went to them. He sat with them. He said no to the ritual washings that would somehow justify their religiousness. So he said no to that part, but he said yes to dinner. And so I think there are ways we can show up to all kinds of things for the sake of relationship, but not participate in the symbolism of what that may represent. So I don't know the line in that. My friend My friend is gay and they're getting married and they invited me to the wedding. I mean, that's like the biggest example. I don't want to go and suggest that I approve for some people, but I also don't want to cut out relationship. The way I've worked this out personally, and this is not for everybody, is that Jesus seemed to err on the side of looking like he was condoning sin. When he was called a friend of sinners, that meant he associated with sinners during meal times, and that was an endorsement, according to the Pharisees, of their behavior. So Jesus they call him a glutton and a drunkard, which is a really big accusation from Deuteronomy 21 that says he's leading Israel astray because he is validating the sin of the sinners. Now, that's not carte blanche everywhere. But if I'm torn in a situation, I would rather err on the side of keeping relationship because I don't see a command that says, let people know I disagree before I love them. Now, there are things for me that I would not or could not participate in because they would compromise my sense of calling or identity or direction, or I would stumble. So there are certain environments I could never minister in because those are not healthy environments for me. But I would rather be a person who, like you, is asking that question case by case, person by person, rather than having kind of a set policy that says yes to everything or no to everything. And that's really the hard part, is that individual discernment of every single situation. That's such a brilliant question. I don't know if I did it in any way, shape, or form justice. One of the things I've learned that we talk about every now and again is that Jesus forbids me from judging and condemning people. Jesus encourages me to distinguish between ways of living and acting that are congruent with his kingdom or not. So if I can participate in situations where I'm not bringing judgment and condemnation on people, but I'm able to discern, hey, this is not for me a pattern of life that is congruent with the kingdom, I'm very often able to sit in those situations as an act of hospitality towards the other without feeling the need to declare, that I don't approve or whatever. Does that make sense? And it's hard. I mean, I wish there were an answer. But the fact that you're asking and wrestling with both sides of that tension is really, I think that's the healthiest place to be, because there is no by fiat issue where we're always going to say yes or always going to say no. The fact that Jesus said yes to the meal but no to the washing, he said yes to the invitation but no to the self-righteous performance. I think we ought to be more discerning in hanging out with religious people, quite honestly. I think the yes on the sinner side should be freely given, but the yes on the religious side maybe should be more discerning, right? Because that's where the traps are. Oh, so good. All right, we got a couple more. Yeah, Edwin.
Question real quick.
Yes, sir.
Trying to wrap my brain around the bad religion and the examples you have discussed today. There was a line that I put on social media a long time ago that says, God uses crooked sticks to make straight lines. And then 15 minutes later, I got a text that says, hey, that's actually kind of wrong. God straightens sticks to use them. So I'm just wondering if we're in this bad religion series that we're going, are we both wrong? Are we both kind of right?
So good.
Like how? So yeah.
All right, outside of Jesus, give me one straight stick of a biblical person.
Touche.
All right, there is no straight stick. David, nope. Jacob, nope. Abraham, nope. Rahab, nope. Mary, we get close, right? We don't know anything sinful about her except that she was human. They're only crooked sticks. Now, there is a point that says Jesus does straighten sticks, absolutely, but he doesn't wait until they're straightened to use them. Often he will use them in order to straighten them. And there are other times, like with Samson, where he'll use them and they just get worse. And so I would simply say, if the goal of your Christianity is to try to be a straight stick in order to be approved by God and humans, that is a totally unredemptive goal. if your goal is to be open and available to the Spirit to use you just as you are, where you are, Paul so clearly says he uses jars of clay, great band name, maybe, to house unsurpassable treasure so that people know that the treasure is not from the jar, but it's from God. Does that make sense? So I guess my response would be, yeah, I do want to get better. The longer I follow Jesus, I want to be more loving. I want to be more kind. And I want to be a part of a community that embodies the fruit of the Spirit. Yes. But if I waited until my motives were pure before I did anything, man, I would wait forever. So I guess that would be my response. I just don't see a straight stick. Even, yeah. I mean, we could just go through all of the examples and be like, man, screwed up there, screwed up there, screwed up there. And that's one of the reasons why I trust the Bible is the Bible does not paint its heroes heroically. The Bible paints them as humans, which makes all sorts of room for us, right? Because I'm a crooked stick too. So great question, man. We got time for one more if we want to do it. Going once. Yes. Wait. Brilliant thought incoming. We want to capture it.
Wasn't sure there's a quota per family, but want to make sure that I can get this out. So my issue is then, what is it about us that we desire morality than righteousness? Because you mentioned that in where you grew up and where I grew up in, we seem to reward people who are more moral than righteous. So is it your fault or is it our fault in essence?
Oh, yes. We are willing participants in the charade because, at least for me, I can't speak for anybody else, because it gives clarity and security. To actually have to trust Jesus is frightening. It's so much easier to trust, hey, I've tithed, so God will take care of me. I've prayed for my kids, so it'll turn out okay. I was pure before marriage, so my marriage will be great. It's, for me, not for anybody else, that gives security. I know where I am, and I know where everyone else is. To hang on a cross next to Jesus with an entire life full of injustice and awfulness, and then just say, hey, remember me when you get to your kingdom, with nothing to back it up except the nakedness of your request, that's terrifying. Because then it's only grace. There's nothing you can appeal to, nothing you can boast about, nothing you can feel good about. There's nothing except remember me, please. That terrifies us. And so for me, I would much rather live in the bounded religion where I can keep score. Yeah. Yep, that's it for me. And what Jesus has done in I'm not liberated yet, but I'm tasting the liberation of that, is to actually believe he's trustworthy and good, like not as a religious phrase, but as a deep and abiding reality. That I don't know anything about a lot of things, but I know that Jesus reveals the heart of the Father. And when he reveals the heart of the Father is good. And I will stake everything on that. Man, I get emotional thinking about that. Thank you. I'm glad we allowed multiple questions per family. So Jesus does not speak against ritual. He speaks against empty ritual. So we take communion every week. And the reason isn't because that makes us clean or that shows us approved. The reason we take communion is to remind ourselves of the gift of grace that we've already inherited and the invitation to become what's already true. That what we're appealing to when we stand before God isn't our own goodness or our own religious performance, but it is his mercy expressed on the cross of Christ when Christ took upon the powers and the principalities and the evil of all the bad religion in the world and then declared that he was finished with it and that it was finished with it. We get to sit in the reality of that liberation. It's hard for us for exactly the reasons we were talking about. It's scary to actually trust that he's that good. But taking communion is a place where we remind ourselves, no, that he is. That while we were sinners, before we got it all figured out, before our doubts were cleaned up, and before our addictions taken care of, he gave himself for us. So, to that end, I invite you to take the bread and the cup today. If there are things that are troubling you or causing you pain, we would love to pray for those things. And so around the room at the stations, there are just pieces of paper and writing utensils, and we pray for those every Tuesday. But more than anything, my friends, the goal of this whole exercise is to just remind ourselves of who we really are and what is actually true, so that we might live then in that freedom. So, Lord Jesus, in the name of the Father and the Son and the Spirit, we ask that you would renovate our hearts, transform our imaginations. Let us see with clarity what our participation looks like in your kingdom. Send your Spirit among us with great power and authority, that we might reflect Jesus to an increasing degree. Help us to taste and see that you are good, and to taste the liberation that comes from the gospel of Jesus. We pray that you would unyoke the yoked who are burdened by empty religion, and that you would allow us to hunger for the undivided life, and that we would come out of hiding. And Lord, more than anything, we would be a community where people are allowed to be fully human, because it's those people you came to save. So in the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.